Hi, everybody. How's it going? All right, all right. This is going to be fun. It's a great panel. The thing I like about this panel is that, as I was telling these guys, is that everybody here is doing VR, hands-on, on a daily basis. We're not going to be talking about too much theory or futurism. It's really going to be about what is the state of affairs now, and how do we take advantage of it and create really cool stuff. My name's Jim. Just a tiny bit of background on me. I built my first web page in 1994, started hacking 3D into web pages in 1995, built my first VR game on the internet in 1996. So I've seen a couple of cycles now of this, and it gives me a little bit of a perspective on where we are now. I also helped pioneer alternate reality games and had a big transmedia company. And I just did some time at Google, and am now back to what I love, which is VR. And I call on my LinkedIn, I say I'm doing a stealth VR startup, which just means we haven't figured out a name yet. These are exciting, heady times, right, for VR. There's a huge amount of hype, tons of opportunities. But we've seen this cycle before in various different ways, right? Hype, boom, bust. Let's just a couple examples, right? 3D TV, interactive television, second screen apps, arguably the World Wide Web, and two previous VR cycles. What I'm hoping we can do here is, first of all, lay out a clear, realistic state of where we are right now, with warts and all, so that we all have a good baseline of where we're coming from, and then build into more of what are we reaching for, what is the future. So at the moment, I'm going to shut up and let my esteemed panel here introduce themselves. Jake.
Hi, yeah, I'm the CG and VFX supervisor at Firstborn. Firstborn is a digital creative agency. For the last couple of years, we've been creating a few VR experiences, ranging from pure live action to pure CG. One of our larger productions, we were one of the first to integrate CG into 360 drone footage. Other than the tech and the production process, Firstborn and myself are really interested in the creative storytelling that accompanies VR, and we're always looking towards more interactivity with VR.
David?
My name is David Rosenbaum. I am a director, commercials, music videos, and now VR content, unbeknownst to me. I've done about 6 or 7 VR films in the past 3 years, unknowing that I was kind of at the beginning of something. So now I seem to be in the thick of it. I'm like I think everybody here, we're interested in where it's going and how to use it to tell stories and not just sort of sit in the middle of a cool experience and just let the camera roll. And there's a lot of rules right now, there's a lot of restrictions, and I think there's a lot of skepticism as to kind of how to make this go further without having a bust. So curious to see everybody else's thought on that.
Cool. Andrew?
Hi, I'm Andrew Brown, Director of Strategy at Holoviz, a UK-based immersive experience business. My background is in experience design. We work in 2 fields. One is in the enterprise space, where we're working with organisations on both virtual and augmented reality, and the other is in the entertainment space, where we're taking both of those technologies into a new ride category, which is sometimes called media coasters, sometimes called dark rides, but essentially indoor experiences, and we're doing those in China, the Middle East, and in the US.
Cool. I'm Jeff Nicholas. I'm a partner, co-founder, and president of the Uprising Creative. I also work as a director of music videos, commercials, short-form content. We are an integrated creative and production company, so we work across design, digital, experiential and content creation. About a year and a half ago, we started kind of moving into VR, experimenting with it. It was a great mix of everything that we do at Uprising. In that time, we shot a bunch of tests, and then we did a music video with Mike Shinoda from Linkin Park, and then we did a comedy short with Kenan Thompson from SNL, both of which got great reviews. Now we have about 10 pieces in development, and today we just launched our VR content creation studio, Vehicle VR, where it was kind of like a natural evolution of everything that we're doing. We decided to push it out into its own entity that focuses specifically on storytelling.
Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter Oberdorfer. I'm co-founder and director of content at Tactic, a VR, AR, and real-time immersive entertainment company in San Francisco. We have affiliates in New York and LA as well. We're working on several VR pieces now. We've done work with the SF Giants, some work with bands like these guys, Film 360, real-time game engine-based VR, and sort of integrated experience design. And my background is in visual effects and films prior to that.
Cool. All right. By the way, if during the course of this somebody has a burning question or comment, don't be afraid to raise your hand. This is not just a one-way conversation. Let's start with let's get cut right to the chase. I spent 5 or 6 years in the first, or arguably the first, big VR excitement period in the 90s. It basically died from overhype, underfunding, and primarily lack of content. Why is it different this time? What, are we just reinflating the same old bubble, or is this really the beginning of the real thing?
I'll jump in. I think one of the biggest pieces seems to be the evolution of technology. So back in the 90s, you were strapping CRT monitors to your face, and they were fucking heavy. You know, it's big, hulking pieces of machinery and low computing power, so you couldn't really render out video the way you can, interactive experiences the way you can. So I think that feels like the precipice for it. But then you also have a whole new generation of content creators that kind of grew up in this world that mixes interactive and film content. So it was kind of like it feels like a confluence of all of that coming together.
Cool.
I think we also discussed this earlier where...
You might want to
Oh,
talk
sorry.
more.
I think we also discussed this at a different time, that the difference now is also that it's being funded heavily. Unlike the last bubble, some good things are coming from the companies, I think, that are funding it. It's not just necessarily film studios and things like that are funding it, but rather, people like Facebook and stuff like that are, I think that virtual reality and augmented reality have, they don't only have to go the way of movie making. They can also go in all different forms of storytelling that aren't sort of traditional media of how we see or how we're used to consuming stories.
Right.
And I think that's the exciting part.
Well, we have kind of a chicken or the egg thing with technology and content, though, right?
Yeah.
Most of the money that's going into it right now is technology companies, right? But in the meantime, the content that I think we all agree is out there, is pretty tough. It's hard to get people at the top of their game to buy into a format that's still very, very early. How do we break that cycle?
I think one of the things that's also driving change is that in the enterprise space, companies are very suggestible to new technologies that are going to give them some kind of competitive advantage or help them stay ahead of the pack. Because most companies now, compared to the 90s, are tech companies. If they lose their networks, most businesses now stop functioning within an hour. So they're much more functionally literate around technology. So when you come up with an idea with technology and you're not talking to the CTO, but you're talking to people in design or in manufacturing or logistics or in marketing, they kind of get it to begin with. And you link that to the previous point about technology, and you're getting a really interesting sweet spot.
Right. I think, you know, even studios that are mainly content driven, like a lot of ours, unlike the 90s, we have a component of engineers and tool builders that are essential to the craft right now because, you know, the platform is still evolving. So a lot of the time we have to roll our own in terms of, you know, how are we going to do this camera capture? How are we going to display this? How are we going to be able to track the user? You know, all these things, there are competing sort of formats and ways of doing this and ways of scaling the experiences. And a lot of the decisions, although they aren't custom decisions, involve sort of integrating sort of nascent systems that are just coming online now. And that requires a lot of sort of, you know, lab development internally, which is one reason why I'm very interested in this as opposed to, you know, film production and things like that, which are, you know, although there's a lot of innovation there, you know, have a lot more worked out systems and platforms in place. And here, every project is, you know, there's a lot of problem solving and a lot of, you know, being part of a more global solution, I think, which makes it very interesting as a creator.
Well, from a very practical standpoint, one of the things you have to do is get technologists, programmers, and creatives to talk to each other, which, you know, is historically not, you know, the most natural conversation in the world. How do you guys bridge that gap when you're doing projects between having a creative visionary on one side and these very practical, technical issues on the other?
I think that's a really exciting time to be in, though. Like, for the first time, we're seeing the industry, like, we're having the gaming industry, the filming industry, and then the digital industry combining skill sets and creative. Like, as a company, we have developers, coders, and artists all working in under the same roof. And I think it's what's kind of developing from that is actually going to be creating some great content.
I was talking to somebody earlier today about it, where one of the hardest parts is Silicon Valley and the programmers in SF and the programmers around any tech company are sort of gods within their company. They're the ones that are driving the technology. They're the ones that have all of these people working for them. And when you come down to Hollywood and you come down to content creation, the directors and the EPs and the producers are sort of gods in their world. They've got all these people working for them. So when you put those two things together, those partnerships and creating content can be super fucking difficult because you've got heads that are, you know, saying, right, no, the tech needs to be first, or no, the content needs to be first, and these egos that sort of don't mesh. And I think we're working a lot of that out now. Like, we've seen projects implode. You know, I've seen, you know, partners all over the place going like, oh, these fucking guys. And it's just that natural working out of the process and understanding both sides of the table. I think as that gets ironed out, it gets a lot easier to cross-collaborate and start creating bigger and better content.
So, I mean, how do you do that? Literally, how do you get
you
them to talk to each
compromise,
other?
you give, I mean, it's like, you know, interpersonal relationship shit, you know? It's, which both sides don't really have great skills in.
Yes,
So.
indeed.
I was actually going to say that is my sort of biggest issue is I'm the creative director at Jaunt, and the problem that I always run into is talking to the engineers, telling them that the technology that they've created is amazing and it's completely useless to me.
Right.
Because when you're on set and you can babble all you want about, you know, light field, you know, data and capturing data, but if I can't see what I'm looking at, then my basically my leg up as a director is gone.
Right.
So there is something to be said for having that back and forth, because it takes the compromises to push it forward, and it takes sort of strong minds in both sides to say, you know, the engineers can say, well, you need this. You don't know you need it yet. But this is a new medium. You need this, and it takes the director, the creative, to say, no, I don't need this.
Right.
I need this.
Right.
And so it's sort of moving people. I think it's how any great technology is created. It's a compromise of different types of people that come together and sort of give a different viewpoint.
Right. I mean, it goes back to the early days of the movies, right? Yeah. You start out with the kinetoscope or the zoetrope or whichever ope you were working with back then, and the amazing content was a horse running like this, right?
Yeah.
Or there's a person and then they disappear in a puff of smoke, and that's it. Like
See,
the storytelling comes second.
Yeah, I
basically.
actually liken VR to the first time people sat in a theater and watched a train come
Yeah.
out the theater, and then they all ran out screaming because it was so real. But you know, you put those same people back in the theater, they watch it a second time, they're like, oh, it's,
Right.
okay, it's a train coming at the screen.
Right,
Fine,
I think
get
that-
it now.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
understand, and that's I think where VR is where it's the train coming at. If you've never seen it, you're oh wow, and then you watch it again, you're sort of like, well, okay, who cares?
That's
Yeah.
why you see a lot
Yeah,
of stationary cameras, though.
Yeah, I think there's going to be, you know, the novelty of this content is going to wear off on the audience. The audience is becoming very quickly educated on what VR is and what, you know, different degrees of VR is. You know, do I have agency in this world? Can I move, you know, besides just looking at this nodally? Is it in stereo? You know, what type of interface do I have? All these things are, you know, initially I think the gimmick of it will wear off on the audience, and they'll demand more and more as the fidelity grows in the platform. And so we'll be informed as much as creators by what the audience is demanding, and that curve will continue to sort of rise rapidly on all sides. So,
Right.
yeah, as a medium grows.
So like everybody's kind of talking about the camera language and like you can't move the camera like this, you can't up and down. And that may just be for the next couple of years, but
Right.
actually we will get adjusted to that and we'll go, yeah, I want more, give me more of that.
Right.
Well, that's what they said in the early days of film, too. It was
Yeah.
like, no, you can't move this camera. You
Right.
cannot move this camera. And
Yeah.
then somebody was like, wait, what if I move this camera?
Yeah.
You know? And then they put it on a dolly track, and they went like,
Yeah.
holy shit, it's steady.
Well, there
Or,
were
you know,
psychologists back then who thought that having parallel stories and cutting between them back and forth would literally drive people insane. Like they were, you know, there was a big uprising because we were going to create an entire race of psychotic people.
We may have done that.
And
We may have done that.
they may not have been wrong. You have a good point. So talking again a little bit practically, new technologies in media, they generally start with two industries. One is porn, and the other is marketing. Well, we're in mixed company. We'll forget about the first one. Jay, what kind of
Have you thought about doing
traction
porn?
at your agency? What sort of traction are you getting from brands and advertisers? And to the extent that you're getting traction, you're getting deal flow, how are they justifying that investment, given the challenges?
I mean, every brand is different, and we try and create an experience that's, you know, perfect for them. But maybe it's better for me to use an example for a previous project of gaining brand awareness and another use of VR. We did a project for Patron, and it was like the artisanal process of making tequila. And so here's a great experience. You're basically the eyes of a bee, and you move through these environments of making tequila. Great. This is a fun experience for consumer. But what the brand actually did, they went straight to other businesses, and so they were actually educating these distributors and retailers and showing them, look, this is tequila, this is how you make it, and so they remember that process, and then they're buying in, you know, much heavier load of products with that, and I think that was one of the kind of the surprises that came off the back of VR.
So more of a business to business sort of project rather than to consumer.
Business to consumer, yeah.
Because the consumer distribution isn't quite there yet. That makes sense. Jeff, you've done a lot of work with really big name musical artists, Rihanna and Shakira, and lots of stuff my kids listen to. And there's so much possibility in mixing VR and music. And I've talked to not Shakira and Rihanna, but a lot of musicians who are super excited about having immersive videos and you know, live streaming VR concerts and all the rest of it. Are you seeing that from these big artists? And what are the possible models, the business models for getting that stuff paid for?
I know David can speak to this a little bit too, because you guys have been playing in that world. There's a lot of interest. I think it's really parallel to the brand side too, and also to the general sort of original content side. There's a lot of interest from artists. There's a lot of interest from brands. There's a lot of interest from people who want to create original content. It's not about interest, but it is about education, because a lot of those same people don't quite understand what you can do. You say, let's go make something in VR, and they go, oh, cool, we'll put a camera at my next video shoot and capture the behind the scenes of that. You're like, that is the absolute opposite of what we should be doing with VR, but that's okay. Like, if you don't understand the process and you don't understand what you can do with it, that's immediately where your head's gonna go, right? Presence. On the creative side, it's really easy to educate. It's really easy to show them something or talk about it and get their heads wrapped around it. On the funding side, that's where it becomes more challenging. Because what you've got is, it's the case with any new technology. You've got someone up the chain, whether it's at the label or the brand or the agency, who doesn't quite get it, or doesn't get it at all and doesn't understand why they would put money into something that's so emerging and that doesn't have consumer-based distribution yet. So we have to start educating up that chain as we're going through the process, so that we can get to the money that will then fund the projects. The Mike Shinoda project, Mike came out of pocket. Mike could do that, right? He wanted to make it. No, he couldn't get funding from the label, so he said, "Fuck it, I'll do it."
Right.
Not everyone has the ability to do that, right? So that's the biggest challenge we face right now. And what we're doing over on the vehicle side, on the original content side, because there's no distribution channel yet. There's no Netflix or Hulu of specifically VR. Some of them are in the works and they're coming soon, but it's not there yet. So you don't have a buyer for that original content like you do a film or a TV series. So that's all changing. It's like everybody's standing around this big hole and they know it's probably pretty rad if they jump in, but no one wants to be the first one in case it's, in case they die.
Yeah.
So it's, that's the biggest challenge right now, and I think that changes in the next 6 to 9 months.
Cool. Let's hope so.
You got a question out in that? A burning question.
A burning question?
Burning question.
Yes, sir.
Just kind of riding off that last comment, what do you think platforms like YouTube 360 have on the kind of content that's being created now? Now that a lot of people can just access that based off YouTube.
Yeah, well, I think YouTube and Cardboard and Jump and YouTube 360, their whole package that they're pushing over there. Yeah, now Facebook. I think it's a great primer into the market of immersive. With Cardboard and YouTube 360, I mean, now we can all publish anything, put it up, and everyone can view it. The problem then becomes, is that experience going to leave them with like, oh, that's all it is? Or is it going to drive them to check out a headset and see something more immersive?
Yeah, it is. It's like, it's really good for awareness, but that's all it is, because it's not really the same thing, right? You're creating a 360 video, but not all 360 videos are very good. And, you get someone who's never seen it to look at a 360 video and go, okay. You sort of have lost them until you can show them something that's worth it. So you get into this strange place where it can also hurt, in a sense. It can also move us backwards, because it's not always the greatest content that sort of, until someone makes a bunch of cats in 360 and that goes viral, nobody's going to really care, I think.
Right.
But I think that's the reason why the platforms and the headset manufacturers and everybody are moving so quickly. Like if you look at this year, you look at the beginning of this year and where we are now and how accelerated everything is, people are realizing if we don't get the headsets out mass market right now, then we're going to end up in this place where the public goes, fuck it, I don't care about that. Right.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, we're in this bridge technology mode where the only scalable things are Facebook and YouTube 360 and things like that, but they have very limited appeal over time, and there is a timing to this. Right. So the release of the headsets are really important.
You saw that with the New York Times yesterday with 1 million Google cardboards that they're putting out.
Yeah.
So that the need to build scale and to build critical mass, so the user base is then asking for something, rather than people forcing content onto people that people can't access.
Well, it's the electric car thing. Nobody wants a 40-mile electric car. They want the 300-mile electric car.
I think it's also just real quick that most people outside of, I think, the people who are paying attention, they don't have any clue what VR is. They don't know what VR means. You know,
Right.
for the most part, my parents don't know what CG means, right? So we sometimes forget that we're in this very select group of people that sort of understands the technology. And so until everybody knows that 360 is not necessarily VR and VR is not necessarily, you know,
Right.
Facebook 360, I think the speed is really important.
Right.
to get
So-
VR
and-
needs branding, if anybody wants to take that on. I mean, really, though, it's like when you look at Wi-Fi. When Wi-Fi came out, people are like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Right.
And now we all know because there was a branding campaign that went into, you know, telling the story of what Wi-Fi is.
Right. So Andrew, you're taking a bit of a different approach. You're not waiting for consumer distribution. You know, in your bio, it says VR AR is a great technology in search of a business application. But you seem to be doing pretty well. How are you approaching it? What is different about what you're doing?
Okay, well, I'll give just a couple of case studies. One, in the enterprise space, working with Jaguar Land Rover, who I don't know if you know how cars are designed, but basically at some stage you have to build a clay model, and a clay model costs about $1 million GBP, so sort of 1.4, 1.5 US, and you need an average of 5 models per new vehicle program. So that's quite a lot of money. The Land Rover Evoque, if any of you have one, was the first car that was designed entirely in a VR cave, which we put together and did the software with them to do that. Which means that the car could be designed in virtual space. All the parameters could be analysed virtually in full 1-to-1 scale volumetric 3D in a four-sided cave, which is essentially a four-sided room with rear projected screens. You can put the seat into the space, and then you can do all the vehicle ergonomics. You can also do external views of the car, right down to photorealistic resolution in terms of looking at shut lines and looking at surface areas. They only needed to do one clay model for the Evoque, so instead of doing 5, they only needed one final clay model, and the clay model that they did was actually an exact replica of the one that was done in the cave. They didn't need to actually refine the clay model at all. So that's one example of doing it in the enterprise space. Another example with VR going into theme parks, as I mentioned. A lot of theme parks are now going into places in the world where the temperature is pretty extreme, and you need to put people inside. You need to take people indoors, which means you need to give people things to look at. And because of the in-home experience now getting so good, if you go to a theme park, you've got to see something you can't see at home or get at home. So we're doing real-time gaming, interactive gaming in a dark ride environment for theme parks, which makes the gaming experience original every time you do the ride, potentially. And you can then skin the ride for particular seasons, so you can do a Halloween ride, you can do a Christmas ride, and you can flick the gaming very quickly. This isn't film that is done once and then fixed. This is stuff that you can change on the fly, which is making the theme parks much more interested in making the investment in the tech to run this, because
Right.
they can run it for different demographics.
So you're basically skipping over the whole distribution problem
Yep.
by taking the technology straight
Yep.
to the consumer.
Yeah.
You know, one of the big scary numbers out there right now, when the Rift comes out, it's going to be really $1,500, including the computer and the headset.
Yep.
And that's a pretty high bar for any consumer product.
But that's true for any new technology too. I
Agreed.
mean, when you look at like the electric car model, they started out really high, and now you can get, you know, a Chevy Spark for, you know, $125 a month or something. You know, it
gonna
starts
go
to
down.
kind of democratize as it evolves.
Cool. So, Peter, you're doing work across a whole bunch of different formats, VR, AR, second screen. What at the moment is providing sort of profitable projects for you? Like where is it settling out right now?
Well, you know, we're just trying to make a buck like any other company. But, you know, I think what I'm seeing and, you know, is an acceleration towards VR as kind of a confluence of a lot of the real-time and game engine type of work that we've done in the past. initially the format had to define itself. There had to be development kits and things like that coming out. But now, mobile and as well as tethered experiences are becoming more commonplace, and I think there's an education of the audience and of the customer base that we have, in agencies and such, that the demand is there for VR. So when, like last year, we would have done an AR app for an agency or something like that. Now VR is the flavor, and I don't think that's just a temporary thing. I think we're moving towards something where the convergence of all of these factors, real-time visualization, hardware platforms, all this is allowing us to do these types of more and more immersive visualizations, which come out in the format of VR. And that's going to be even more true middle of next year when there actually are consumer headsets out there and millions of people looking for content. I think that's when, this panel really gets to enjoy a little bit of, a real medium up there that's fairly mature, and we can, look at these integrated ad buys and not see VR as an add-on or something that's just, in addition to the music video or in addition to the ad campaign as a, the rump end of the budget. It's
Right.
going to be, as big as the Super Bowl ad and everything else,
Cool.
in the main event.
Cool. Let's talk about creative a little bit. David, you've done a lot of work at Digital Domain and built a lot of amazing stories in the traditional space. You are used to, until the last few years, knowing where every single pixel is in the user's visual field. It's not like that with VR. You're basically co-directing the experience with the audience, which for a director has to be kind of a tough pill to swallow.
It's horrible.
It's
horrible.
What's that transition been like, and how do you deal with the idea that you have no control over where your audience is looking at any given moment?
Yeah. Well. So I'm constantly jumping back and forth still, and they're two completely different beasts. And I think everyone will agree there's no language for VR as a creative. There's no you can move the camera, you can't move the camera. You're only restricted by what you try. So it's a very big experimental time for VR. And I constantly say that VR is not the evolution of cinema, because I don't think that it has anything. It's I think if anything, it's the evolution of theater.
Yeah.
And theater in itself is by nature, you're able to look wherever you want. So how did the theater solve for that? They have, the lights go up on the right side of the stage and the left side of the stage. People are still doing things, but they're drawing your attention with light, for that example. So if anything, and I am not, maybe this is the wrong thing to say here, but I am not a gung-ho evangelist for VR. I am still a skeptic in the sense, because I love to experiment and I love to try things, but like everybody up here, we're sort of very new to this medium. So everything we try, you have to be okay with failing, in a sense, and
Right.
that is a really difficult thing for any creative, for a director, for a writer. You write things that sound like they could work,
Right.
and you direct things that you think might work. But for the most part, and I've used sort of every camera available,
Right.
and there's really only one that does real-time viewing. So with most of them, you're on set and you capture something and you shoot the entire day, and then 2-3 weeks later, you see if it worked.
Right.
And that is the worst thing you can
It's
do
tough.
to a visual medium.
Yeah.
And it's just something that you have to roll with until the technology picks up.
Back when
There's-
you were shooting on film stock, right?
Exactly, where you watch
where-
dailies every night, and now it's not every night, it's 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
So
Is that the Jaunt one that does the real time view? Or which one?
I hesitate to give sort of a
That's same as self.
But it's-
shameless plug or whatever.
no, but it's actually not the Jaunt one, but I know they're working on it, and I know that I just don't want to sort of evangelize any sort of technology because I've used all of them and they all have their merits and they all have their horrible quirks that mess with everything. And it's just being sort of, you know, technology agnostic. It's more of the language of VR that I find incredibly challenging, and that's kind of what draws me to it in a way.
I'll disagree and agree a little bit. Like, I think you're right, like there's no language for it, but luckily what we do have is a language for theater and a language for filmmaking. And so although, yeah, it's not an evolution of cinema, I agree with that for sure, there still is a basis for language rather than like inventing a brand new language for VR. And that helps on set. You can train crews really easily to understand how to create content. But in addition, I mean, on the monitoring side and on the tech side, like it's moving so fast. When we started making stuff at the beginning of this year, there was no monitoring. And then I remember when I was using a 4-camera rig, and when we were able to see the 4 cameras on one monitor through a box, and I was like, holy shit, now I can see what's going on. And now if you look at the guys like Radiant and some of the others too, like I just went over to Radiant the other day, and they've got this POV rig and the head case rig that have wireless monitoring to a Samsung Gear VR on set for the director and real-time stitching. I mean, that shit is moving so quick. They all do have their quirks, I totally agree. But it's moving so fast that we're starting to be able to catch up at least a little bit. But it's very difficult. You know, it's not, you know, we always say 2 to 3 times your normal production day is what you're going to be looking for.
Yeah, just even reviewing a VR is a nightmare. It takes so long.
Yeah.
I think, like, you know, something that you're saying is like trial and error, where, you know, every production we do in VR, we learn something new, and then the next one we try and do something a little bit more bold, a little bit more creative. And
let's add a little more complication. If we're talking about the difference between movies and theater and the audience being able to look, more than that at this point, VR is a place where people want to do stuff. They want to push on the content and have it push back in some way, right? And it's the sort of age-old conflict between games, which are kind of at their essence simulations, right? And on the other side, stories, which are by their nature, you know, as much as Choose Your Own Adventure has tried to screw it up, it's a linear medium. So how do you deal with this urge from an audience member to, because they feel like they're there, how do you deal with their urge to go and interfere with the characters that are talking, or, you know, warn somebody that, you know, the killer is around the corner or whatever?
I think as the technology is evolving, those stories are changing. You know, like as creatives, you come up with any budget, with any sort of project that comes along. If you can't afford it, you find another way. And so it's the same idea with VR. If you can't do it yet, you find another way of doing it, and then someone comes along and they say, well, actually, we can do that. And so, you know, like Jeff said, it's changing fast. So integrating game, you know, engine, I spoke to someone on Saturday that's doing live action mapped onto Unity, you know, a Unity game engine. So it is live action being projected into a game. So you're still getting a live action experience, but at the same time, it's a little bit more of a, you know, a segment based, where if you look over here, then it activates the live action piece that happens over here, so people don't miss it necessarily. So there are a lot of things happening, but right now you're limited by the technology. So as that changes, then more pieces will come on that will change.
Could I offer an experience design perspective on what's said? Rather than kind of fighting that issue of people wanting to get involved, try and embrace it. In a previous life, in doing experience design, there's a principle when you're designing experiences: the closer the consumer is to the production of what they're experiencing, the more invested they become in it. So restaurants knew this many years ago when they would put the kitchen out in the middle of the restaurant. And if you see the food being made, you're more invested in eating that restaurant because you believe it's going to be high quality. If you see your car being fixed through a glass wall rather than through a brick wall where you can hear a mechanic whacking it with a hammer, you're more invested in the fact you're going to get your car coming back in the way that you want it to be fixed because you can see it being done. What VR and AR does, particularly VR, it allows the person who is consuming the content to be part of the experience. So rather than fight that, you need to change the paradigm and look at it from their perspective. and then riff on their motivations and riff on what they're trying to do, rather than on the director's idea of what he's trying to impose on the story. And this hasn't yet fully evolved, and I think we're going to see some really exciting stuff come out of this. The great VR directors are not the old directors. They're going to be new directors who get this stuff.
Yeah, and I think it might end up going, instead of just all being this grand unifying theory, at least in the medium term, there may be a period where you see 360 video and more game-like simulations, sort of this bifurcation and perfecting of those two media separately before they end up becoming some kind of light field simulation, whatever, in 15 years or so. I think the two of them really are inherently different in the way that the content is communicated, and maybe best thought of in separate ways for a while, at least until they evolve a little more.
Great.
I read this article that said, passive VR, which is what we're talking about when we talk about, filming content. Passive VR is not actually VR.
No, that's right.
Right? It's
Right.
a projected 360 film
Yeah.
or content.
It's 3D on steroids.
It's 3D on steroids. It's it is the starting point for live action, but it is not by any means the ending.
Right,
No
and
conversion.
I don't even want to make a value judgment
Yeah.
about that, like what's better or worse. I mean, for somebody who's a linear storyteller, they may really want to make a 360 movie.
Right.
And in its current format, it may have its own limitations and things like that. It's just when you're embracing the medium, it's good to kind of know where that stands and what the capture technology is, and how you want to tell the story. But I think for the audience, they're beginning to learn that a game like simulation and a narrative thing like that Verse would do or something like that are two different things.
Yeah, let's talk about the audience. I'm just going to ask one more question, then we're going to, speaking of the audience, allow them to ask questions. So let's assume that all these technology and distributions distribution issues are solvable, which I think they are. In order for this to be successful, we have to introduce, let's call them the civilian population, to VR and what it is. What's the vision that we're giving them? What is the picture that we're painting for, your average consumer in Iowa, as to why this is a good thing as opposed to a terrifying Matrix-like, futuristic Skynet world where we're all going to be sitting, in basements with, weird hats on our heads.
Well, we don't know that it's not going there.
Well, but,
Screen resolution?
Okay, so even if it is, that's probably not how we want to pitch it to them,
Yeah.
right?
The reason I'm struggling is I'm trying to work out the UK equivalent of Iowa, which I don't know what that is. Yeah,
It would be one of the
Wales.
Shures. I
yeah,
think.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think the equation we have in our head all the time when we're looking at this is think of it like this. It's how forgive me for this word, the compellingness of what you're doing minus the cost of acquiring that experience. And if that equation is wrong, then people won't engage with it. If that engagement is right, they will. So putting on a headset at the moment is quite a high cost, actually, both literally and metaphorically. So if I'm going to put that on, how compelling is it when I've put it on? I don't mean just the novelty, just the gimmick. Everybody will put a headset on for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. That's not the thing. That's not the barrier. The barrier is to get them to want to put it on every day for a period of time. And at the moment, that equation is a difficult equation.
Yeah. Well, forgetting about the practical matter, right? But what is it? What do we want a consumer to feel when they're introduced to the idea of VR, whether or not they've actually done it or not?
Yeah.
How do we bring the global consumer into this idea, because we're going to have to do that before we really get to any.
I always talk about empathy. Like the VR is an engine for empathy. And not just empathy, but that's one of the key sort of emotions and feelings that it can conjure up in a way that no other medium can. Fear is another one. You have to be really responsible with it because
Yeah.
you can scare the shit out of, you can really overdo it. But I think it goes back to the compelling nature of the content. If it's a little bit chicken and egg, the technology, there's barriers with the technology, there's barriers with distribution, but they're all sort of working together, and we're promising, getting to your point, we're promising this world where you're able to experience something unlike your current reality that makes you better for watching it or playing it or makes it more fun to engage with it.
Cool.
And I think if we're all driving towards that type of quality, we're good. If we
Right.
miss the mark, we're fucked.
Right.
I was going to say the same thing. It's people talk about movies being an escape, right? That's why you watch movies. It's escape from your real life. This gives you the ability to physically escape, in a sense. As long as you're able to occupy, your audio and your visual senses, you can create experiences that truly do take you away and let you escape. The thing that sort of bugs me a little bit now, and I'll kind of the empathy, you constantly hear that with VR, and I completely agree, but I think it's a little bit of one of the more simple emotions to get from VR. It's kind of the easiest one to get because empathy, you put someone close to someone crying and you don't know them. That's,
Especially if you use the right music. as
yeah,
well.
it's sort of empathy. It's sort of empathy. It's kind of the the Apple commercial in VR in a sense, where everybody's going to cry. It's just it's sort of pandering to the lowest common denominator. And I think it's once you do get those other emotions, happiness,
Right.
fear is starting to starting to see some cool stuff come in that. But it's once you can range the gamut of emotions, I think that's when you've reached where VR has its real sort of day, in
Awesome.
a sense, once you get all those.
Cool. I am going to now open the floor up.
One guy over here.
This gentleman here's ready.
I have a question about the reality part of virtual reality. The reality is our eyes are spherical. That there's a thing called spherical distortion. So we look at the back there, things are out of focus. The pixel is flat. How do you relate in terms of giving us a sense of real reality? How do you deal with that problem, that issue? Nobody's ever been able to solve it.
Trickery.
To a degree. In order for virtual or reality to work, I think we know when something's out of focus or should be out of focus or too much in focus. How do you get through that issue so that we as consumers not go into a virtual space, but a reality space? And how do you do that by trying to capture it?
I think there's always been a compact between the person who's experiencing what it is you're pushing at them and the people pushing at them. If you go to the theatre, it's a completely compromised, unreal experience. There's a proscenium arch or it's in the round.
But the picture builds in spherical distortion. That is, everything is not in focus.
Sure.
So there is depth of field.
Sure.
How do you deal with the issue of reality as depth of field in virtual reality or in the making of these things?
Well, I'm not sure you need to, in the sense that the customer will find their own level of acceptance. It will be real enough for them, and it's that word enough, it'll be real enough for them, or it won't be. It's back to the definition of compelling again.
Well, I think the camera tech's not there yet either, though, because you're looking at rigs that started being based on GoPro systems, and now you're looking at that head case rig you can look at out there that is based on more of a sensor that has real depth of field on those lenses. Depth of field becomes really tricky when you're filming it because if one is different than the other, your whole fucking stitch is destroyed. But those are new technology problems that I think will be solved because I agree from a live action capture standpoint, I want to be able to create that depth. You can do it in CG right now.
Right, you can do
degree.
foveated rendering and track the eye and all this sort of thing, but I mean that is early days and we're barely getting what we need to onto these screens, and then filming it with arrays of cameras that are really high res and then boiling that down to a fairly low res single view. So it's a lot going into one package right now, and I think that's going to come, but there was something by Zeiss or something saying that to match reality, it had to be like 32 times the resolution or something of what it is now, and we're ways away from that. So
I mean, the tech is definitely coming, but it's
Yeah.
also the other levels. We've got binaural sound now, and that
Yeah.
really makes it very believable. To the certain level.
yeah.
So I think in short, the answer is we have top people working on it right now.
Right. Right.
It's coming.
I have a question. So, with 3D printing, like right now, it's kind of like everyone wants a 3D printer. But like, I would say only the people that really understand 3D are the ones that are utilizing them to the fullest. With VR, I would say like the gaming community is probably the most eligible to like use this technology and understand it and be able to afford it, like with like Steam and having the computers to run like these VR experiences and the acceptance to trying them out. How influential do you believe the gaming community is to advancing technologies in VR?
Number one or number two if you include porn, but probably number one. I mean, it really is. VR was sort of made for an amazing, engaging gamified experience. I think passive is like you were saying. It's people applying cinema to VR, and that's not the end game.
No, but I think you have gaming, and that is one separate area. But using some of that technology from gaming, you are going to have this kind of AI surrounding. They will understand where you're looking, and that will make a better experience. You're creating or capturing 360 degrees, but you're not seeing it all. You need to look around, and then if there's a moment of action and you miss it, then the whole experience is kind of wasted.
I also almost think I'm of the mindset that games and film, let's call it, are two completely separate mediums. I've never really seen
Right now.
right now, of course. I've never really seen a game that's come out based on a movie or in conjunction with a movie that really pushed my level of excitement for the movie. Do you know what I mean? It's just they're sort of separate entities, and they have been, and they've tried to bring the directors in to make one cohesive thing, but they're almost afterthoughts at a time. And I think that there's, we're sort of at this place where games are trying to emulate what movies have given us, depth of field. They're trying to get them to look more real. They're adding vignetting. They're adding all of these things that movies have added for years. And now we might just see it go the opposite way, where the games have things that now VR can offer in the cinema world that give us another. I think like these guys said, it's one sort of pushing up the other. So right now, I think games, along with porn, is a big motivator to the technology in VR.
Great. I'm gonna.
Yeah.
Sir.
Looking at the entertainment world, concerts, music, what's the uptake in terms of consumer receptivity and cost and convenience?
That's tough.
I personally, and I'll speak for myself, I can't stand the thought of just plopping a camera down and recording a live show.
I agree.
I think it's great if you're a fan of that artist, you might watch it once. I think, if you're a fan of music in general, you might watch a couple of them, but it gets boring after a moment. That's my personal opinion. There's lots of companies that are heading down that road, and more power to them. I don't know. I think it's got to be more engaging than that. I think there has to be something to capture you more than presence. So I don't know. I don't know if anybody else studies those metrics. I don't, because I'm not interested in it.
I agree.
I think there's a panel going on right now about streaming sports and live events.
I think your interest dies very quickly, at least for me, when I can't do this. Just simply move to left and right, and without a game engine of any kind, or you're capturing it from one viewpoint, and that's it. And I have no control except for looking around. Just to me, it's not. I agree with Jeff. It's not interesting.
Cool. Sir.
Hi, Greg with Peace Guy. You mentioned there was a lot of funding. Actually, I would first take issue. I think there's not that much funding yet. This is kind of like the internet in '94.
Yep.
I think we're really going to see huge funding in about 2 years, like in the many billions of dollars. But my question is, most of that funding that I've seen has been pointed at tech companies. When does that funding, and what are the methods to fund independent content development at this point?
Go ahead.
I mean, you guys too, though.
It's a big.
For us right now, that's the world I'm in right now as we speak, in development, trying to find funding sources for original content pieces, whether it be shorts or series. And part of it right now is coming from selling that content through as exclusives to a particular distribution channel, whether it be Samsung for Milk VR or the buyers aren't really there yet, though. You know, like you're saying, the money's going into the tech side, which it needs to right now. But I think over time that's going to change. There's going to be paywalls. There's going to be ad supported, but ad being an experience, not an ad.
Yeah.
And people take issue with that. But it's hard though right now. It really is. There's a finite amount of dollars being spent, and no one really wants to jump in and spend a bunch of money on a piece of content they don't know if people can see.
The problem we're finding with agencies with work on this is that is it more money that's required to add this as another channel, or are we going to substitute an existing channel and do this instead? And the problem is the use cases for VR aren't there yet to do the substitution. So this is an additional sum of money. So if the budget is X million, they're asking for X million plus for VR. Rather than saying, no, you don't need to spend all that money on this. You can just spend a portion of it on VR. At the minute, we don't have that model.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of brands right now, they're wanting to just jump on it because it's new, and
Yeah.
the PR that surrounds VR, creates a buzz and creates more awareness about them.
Right.
I think that's a lot of what
I think
where the money's coming from.
the PR is probably more viewership than the actual.
I think it is.
And back to the beginning too, like, talking about just the platform investment that's been made when Facebook is putting down so much money into Oculus, and you have PlayStation as a huge content channel, having their VR moment, and Steam, which has 60 million users worldwide, that's a content channel. So once these devices are in people's hands, you've got, I think a dearth of content all of a suddenly, and we're looking at being 4 or 5 months away from some of that. So,
Right.
The hockey stick starts to go
Yeah.
really quickly, I think.
Yeah. Sir.
Okay, for the panel to make predictions, and what would be the first critical mass kind of adoption in the high value area? What would that area be out of the following three? Gaming aside, number one, advertising type of messaging, enterprise services, or a doctor seeing a patient, sees skeleton,
Right.
or an engineer seeing through the wall CPAPs and so on. Third one being the long-form content, movies and so on. So 1, 2, 3, what would be there, and then what happened first?
Two. I think two.
Yeah, two.
Enterprise,
Enterprise
enterprise
is going to be huge. Just to be whether it's controversial or not, I think gaming is going to be a niche. I think it's leading the field at the minute, just like porn is a niche. They're interesting, but the mass market adoption, the really transformational stuff, is not going to be in those two areas. We're seeing a really exciting transformational interest in learning and development training, the remote expert stuff as it relates to VR, AR. You've only got to look at how popular YouTube how-to films are. If you want to do anything at home, you go to YouTube now and you look it up on YouTube and you watch the video. Imagine being able to do that in a high-quality AR, VR environment.
Right,
That's
like
gonna
the
be huge.
Oculus Toy Box demonstration at Connect was just mind-blowing, I think, to a lot of people, because it showed two people collaborating, even though that was just a demonstration. Immediately, it leads to all these sort of B2B and industrial applications, I think, that type of
And I think
visualization.
just for the third one, the long form content, I think the issue now is the headsets. Nobody wants to wear them for that long. They
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
don't.
All right. Last question, sir.
Just to change it up a little bit, you mentioned because of all these limitations of the form factors, the headsets, the stitching, the cameras, all of that are such a big issue right now, and probably will be for the next few years until and there's a marketplace for enough headsets in circulation for people to be able to buy in large quantities the content. So I'm just interested for a minute in terms of discussing the form factors and the success rates for some of these location-based VR, if not AR experiences, like theme parks, or not necessarily even giant theme parks and rides, but just kind of location-based experiences where maybe the
That's
form
like a
factors
fourth
are
one.
not
Yeah.
quite as restrictive.
Right.
Possibly. I'd just like to hear something about that, and about whether that's even pushing learning the language of telling stories or dealing with content?
The FEC market is very interested in AR, VR. FECs, family entertainment centres, shopping malls, those kind of places, anywhere where you've got a public space that you're trying to do something interesting with and change the way that people engage with that public space. You'll have people, for early adoption work, I think that'll be a very interesting space.
Yeah.
We just did this. We do a lot of experiential work at Uprising, and one of the things we just did in Shanghai and Tokyo was for Jordan Brand with AKQA, where you got to basically recreate Jordan's last shot or one of Jordan's last shots. And the way they did that was in this massive, like 10 million LEDs, floor screens, and you walk in and defenders come out and you actually go and take the shot. Really, really cool, experiential. But think about being able to do something like that with VR, and the costs come way down and the immersiveness of the experience comes way up. I think it is like the fourth, I think you were just mentioning it, it's like the fourth piece to what you were saying is the three. The experiential, like whether it's a touring element or in a museum or whatever, is going to push adoption really quickly.
Cool. I think we're getting the hook here. We're a couple minutes over. Wow, guys, thank you so much. It's been really fun. You guys are a great panel. Thank you, Digital Hollywood, and thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say, you're so right, because what do we say?